Anyway, good morning, everybody. We moved everything outside because this was the environmental panel, and I felt that one of the reasons I thought it's important to put this group together of many people that I've not met before, other than Maroje, who was here last year. And is because obviously Lopud, as I described yesterday, is such a precious little jewel, and it's really like, it's like Hydra in Greece, no cars, you know, it should have that kind of development and not the type of insensitive wild development. And there are quite a few people that feel very strongly in Croatia about these islands. And, you know, we come here and patronize and say what should be done and what could be done. But, you know, I think it's really important to know what actually some of the local talent, the upcoming and strong architects. So I've actually asked Kresimir Rogina to join us. He's just arrived today from Zagreb.
Hello.
And he's actually the Croatian architect selected for this biennial of EnvironMENTAL. And you're doing a special project, I think, in the Italian pavilion.
No. My colleague Dinko Peracic, who is down there, and me, Peracic and Rogina architects, are invited to the Arsenale, where it's going to be the
central exhibition.
Yeah.
By EnvironMENTAL.
Invited by EnvironMENTAL, yeah.
And around the Lash together. We'll also be in the same, in the Arsenale. So we'll
Nice.
do everything we can to join our forces and make sure that we all support one another in the Venice.
theme is at home in the modern world, which is, let's say, very similar to the theme that you are trying to develop here, I think. Yeah.
Also, we have Ognjen Škunca, who's you, and he's a very dynamic. He's a good friend of mine, so we're sort of related in that way. And he's the representative of UNDP, the United Nations Development Project for this area, and probably he's much better suited to tell you about what he's working on and what he's doing. And Maroje Mrduljaš, he's the chief editor of the only and very decent and very good architectural magazine in Croatia.
It's not actually the only one, but...
Not the only one, but the only one worth reading, right? No. But
biggest.
Really the biggest. And they were very generous and participated in our project last year as well. And Olaf Nicolai, you know, and the reason he's here is because, well, we had to have one non-Croatian on the panel, mainly. And he's a regular of Šipan over there for the last 10 years. So she has a lot of on-the-ground experience. And, you know, I think he'll say, you know, it's like you've been coming here for many years. No, it's
Lake Boccia,
yeah. In fact, you now built 2 boccia courts up in Germany, or in Luxembourg, and they're both called Šipan. Right. And Klaus Daniels, who you know, he's the sustainable development expert. I think I'd like to start with you on the UNDP and sort of give us an overview of what your work is about and how you've been progressing. How long have you been working here?
For 1 year. Project is dealing with conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity on Dalmatian coastal area, and actually Lopud is not our demo site. That's wrong information, but anyway, it's part of the coastal area and good example of kind of development that we would like to support. We are which is there on Pelješac Peninsula, and the point is to preserve biodiversity. Not so much, we are not focused on cultural heritage, but on biodiversity, natural heritage, and at the same time support kind of development that is using it and conserving it. And for the beginning, I think that would be all that I want to share. It seems to me that I'm not best suited to give you a radical slant on contemporary interpretation and interventions in developing sustainable and ecotourism, but maybe I can provide you during the discussion with inputs from real-life context in which this kind of development should happen. Okay, thank you.
Klaus, you're in the sun. You probably want to move. Are you all right there?
Yes.
Okay. You need a hat.
Not in an hour.
Right. I asked you, he didn't give you all that much time to do this because we were recently introduced, but I think that there are a number of technologies out there, and you have quite a lot of resources here that are basically untapped, I think, in terms of energy, in terms of water. And these are supplies that are sometimes just difficult to get to these islands, and other times it's either extremely political or either rather hard to negotiate to get these supplies. And I think that it's an opportunity for people to start thinking out of the box in terms of how they can maintain their properties and security and so on. I don't know if you have if you had time to do your research on this region and contribute some ideas about how we can at least maybe do something. I mean, of course, I'm trying to always focus everybody's attention on this monastery and find the right solutions for it, but then it can become a model for other projects. There are a number of other monasteries that are being restored at the moment, and other structures and holiday homes in remote areas. So how would you suggest handling this situation?
I think the first rules which we have to learn if we are looking for sustainable building design is how we can save energy.
It's okay, it'll catch you.
Is this working?
It's just, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. It's just for the camera because everybody else can hear you. It's just for the recording.
Okay. So I think for you as architects, or for the architects, you have to learn and to look in which way you can reduce the resources. That means if you have to heat, which you have sometimes here also, if you would like to have the same thermal comfort like in other parts of the world, or if you would like to have cool buildings in summer, so you normally need energy for this. But the best way to go on with sustainability design is first to see in which way you can reduce the consumption. That means consumption in heating, in cooling, in electricity, and so on. So for this, or for example, if I would be a partner of the planning team in this building, I would first ask and discuss with you about the conditions. So if we would see, or if you would use the building, for example, also in winter, it's a question in which way you have to heat the building. Best would be not to lose heating energy. So it's a question of isolation or insulation. What can you do? And I think maybe that we can discuss a little bit about this later on. For cooling, for example, it would be nice to use the soil energy. That means the cooling energy of the underground. Maybe that you are allowed to have sinks where you get cold water from the underground, or where you get cooling energy maybe by pipes in the underground where you can press water through. Maybe also that you can store enough cooling energy over the night that on the next day you have a good condition in the building. That means you cool the building directly by the mass. So which you have, and for example, in old cathedrals and which are normally not very hot in summer. So it's a question of mass. Ventilating, for me first, and the most important point would be to natural ventilate. That means not to ventilate by air conditioning systems. And if you use all these resources, that means heating in that way that you don't lose heating energy, or cooling, if you use the mass, then you can reduce more and more the energy consumption. And you can maybe follow the European rules which we have now. That means, for example, that the heat loss in such an area should be lower than maybe 5 watt per square meter. Or maybe that you have lower than 30 kilowatt hours per year. We normally calculate the energy consumption over the year. And the strongest rules, for example, also in France, now is saying that you have to reduce the heat loss and the heating energy lower than 30 kilowatt hours, which means that you need normally U values in the wall system or in the roof, which are lower than 0.2. The cooling load is also a question of how big are windows, for example, and what kind of window or sunblind elements you can use. So I think there are very different ways to reconstruct such a building. This building has small windows, that's clear, but could be that you have other buildings which have bigger window elements. So the G value, that means the reduction of solar energy which is coming in the house, should be maybe in a frame of maximum 6 to 8%. That means that only 6 or 8% of the solar energy in summer should come in the building. So I think in the old architecture, you have special blind elements or frames which gives you a lot of shadow and which reduce the input of solar energy. And on the other hand, you use the mass, which cools the building down. So maybe if you natural ventilate such an old building overnight, then you reduce the temperature and lose the heating energy which you stored over the day in the night behind, maybe by radiation. So you should be able to open the window elements, so the heating energy by radiation is coming out. It's going against maybe the dark sky. Natural ventilation, okay, it's a question of wind. So the wind velocity here in this area is in the middle, 3.0 meter per second, which is very moderate. It's not too windy normally, and you are allowed to natural ventilate in a good way these buildings. So you have to look maybe also to use the thermal effects in such old buildings, so that you get fresh air from the lower parts in the building and go out over the roof, for example. That could be one.
Very, very technical on one specific area. Sorry to break in here, but I think that what your expertise, from my understanding, is also the sustainability of a building and a structure without sort of going into too much detail. Can you imagine what does sustainability mean in architecture? Maybe that's something that we could all discuss, because the word sustainable is a very sorry, you don't need to know. I'm just trying to get the conversation. But sustainability is a word that we all love to use, and I think it's a very buzzword of the moment, but very few people know what it really means. And in terms of architecture, maybe you could be a little bit more specific in terms of describing sustainable architecture and how that... Sorry, back to you.
Sustainability means that on one hand, you get or you use the resources which you have and save so much energy or resources, that's not only energy, that the future generations also have enough. That means that they can run their buildings or their living areas or working areas in the same way like us. That means that we have to save, especially not only for us but also for the future generation. And that the best way to save resources is that we don't use the resources. That means that we use less resources, maybe in energy, also in material, for example. Nobody is discussing in the moment, for example, at what time copper will be finished, or iron will be finished, or whatever will be finished, you know. So the best would be that we have to look that we don't use the resources, or that we don't, that we only use a very, very small part, that the future generations have the same chance to use the resources again.
Yeah, I would like to add something to this issue of sustainability. Of course, you spoke about the technical components of the building and how to make it sustainable in a way. There are different strategies how to achieve this. For example, historical buildings are usually extremely sustainable compared to some contemporary constructions. Also, we know that the architecture is probably the biggest polluter at the earth at this moment. The buildings are producing extreme amount of waste by wasting the energy on different levels. Croatia could add something about this later.
They are waste by themselves.
Exactly, yeah.
Also.
Yeah, but I would also like to add that this idea of sustainability is not related to the one construction or to the one building or to the technical situation, but to the whole territory, to the space in general. Because Croatian coast is one of the least built coast on the Adriatic. If you look at the satellite photographs, and when you look at the Mediterranean, you see this line of light going all around, and then you come to the Croatian coast and there is a dark. And this darkness is actually something which is positive, because we have this space as a resource which we have to keep more or less in the shape like it is. Also, it has to do something with the ideas of identity, because if you ask someone from abroad, what do you know about Croatia? They may know some football players, but they know certain cities, Dubrovnik, Split, maybe Pula. So one of the strongest elements of Croatian identity is its urban history. And this is also something which has to be preserved, and it also has to do something with the sustainability, because we are witnessing the enormous growth of tourist industry. At this moment in Croatia, it's not visible yet because of the moratorium of the building at the coast imposed by Croatian government and the Ministry of Physical Planning. So at this moment, you don't have any constructions at the coast. But unfortunately, there is no strategy of what's going on after this moratorium is over. It could be real chaos. So this is also some issue which should we address, because the space is probably at this moment most valuable resource that Croatia has.
But I'll add something about if we are talking about ecology, it's not only about the energy. It's okay. Energy is okay, because especially here you have three main sources together. You have the sun, you have the earth, and you have the sea. So you can, let's say, pump energy from the sea. I think that's the most valuable thing, speaking in these energy terms. But as Betsky said, architecture beyond building, I would say that ecology is also beyond this energy thing, or sustainability is also beyond these things. Sustainability can be, let's say, how let's talk, for example, of human resources, which is much more valuable than let's say this for me, or it should be for this only physical resources. How to engage people, let's say, like on this island here. Now it's nice when it's warm and summer is coming, tourists are coming and so on. How to engage people to live here and to have a good life during the year. I think that's one of the main issues in general. Talking about Croatian coast. Not only we are going to have another in the 70s of the last century we had a boom of this mass socialist type of tourism, and the people here were very happy because they had to work only 3 months and get money, and then 9th month not doing nothing. But that made very bad sociological situations, because a lot of people migrated. If you want to do something in your life, you have to go to the big cities, to Zagreb and maybe some other major cities in Croatia. So I think also today we should deal with the ecology of environment that we created, which is not natural, unnatural environment, ecology of unnatural environment. That's the very interesting issue for years, not today, but for years. So I think we should think more global on than just energy supplies and those things. That's for now.
Okay.
Olaf.
I mean, I want to emphasize the topic of identity. I'm just a visitor. I'm more or less a tourist, and I think it is better to say that you are a tourist instead of pretending that you know something what you can't know. The only thing what I got when I came here, which is now 11 years ago, the first time, that was still the time where people were looking at you. You go there, is it safe? Can you go there? That what I found here, that was an image what I did not expect, and I was fascinated by the image. Slowly coming back, I saw how the image is made, how it is constructed. And one major topic was on the island of Cypern. I don't know so much about Lopud. It's exactly the topic, that the perspectives of the people who are there. What are these perspectives? I mean, what they are doing there, what they make their living from. Well, in summer times, you have a lot of people that are running business for tourism. In winter time, I think on Cypern there are like 20 people living. So there's nobody. So what is the identity? What is the interest in the space what you have? What is your surroundings? Because the funny thing is that the people you think that are the locals, they are tourists as well, but they do business. So all of them are tourists, also the people, the locals. And that is something very interesting to see, that if it's come to the discussion, there was 4 years ago a German company wanted to build a complex of villas in the Bay of Cypern. And then there was a discussion. This was the first time that there was a discussion between people who run businesses there and people who visited about, is this good or is this not good? And it was very interesting to see how there was the line constructed by, okay, it brings money, we have something we can live from, why let it build them, they will see what happens. And then there was also this mentality, if we don't like it, we have means to destroy it. You know, we know how to deal with them. And the other side, the tourists said, no, I mean, you must have a model, you must have an idea of what you want to do, and you must have a perspective. And the interesting thing was the total lack of perspectives. There was no discussions about that. There was just a short-term interest. They were like, don't care. And I had the feeling I'm not in the position to tell anybody anything. But I can just share experiences, because that was the same situation. I'm from East Germany. What we found in East Germany, people coming tell us what to do and how to preserve things. And you thought, look, I mean, if I would share your living, I would say the same. But that we at first get your standard and then we discuss it. So that was exactly this. There's not a balance. There are a lot of contradictions. And I want to emphasize, and that was exactly what the project yesterday made for me the thing so interesting, that we raise contradictions, that we much more raise the contradictions which are there, because they are here. They will stay and they will create more contradictions. But maybe we can use the contradictions. One could be to say, let's discuss landscape as a product of consuming and how we want to consume. You know, that is not the perspective how we design, we consume, we really take it. And what the way of consuming we want to propose. And then we also have to talk about limits. If I want to have an ecological ship on, it is not for too many people. I have to control the thing somehow. It is for sure, it is luxury tourism. That is what I have to accept. I have to take this. If I say luxury for everybody, it doesn't work. I mean it is a nice thing. That is what you want to have when you say socialism, but it doesn't work in a way that we survive it. So these are the contradictions. What I still come very often back here, and I love it to be here. But it's like learning that the term Arcadia was written on a tomb. You know, if you go. That is the first time that it shows up in literature. People forgot about it. Arcadia is an inscription on a tomb. And in Arcadia, ego is death saying. So, and that is the point, what makes the things very interesting. So I cannot contribute in a way what's to do, but
the issue is this overlapping of realities, you know.
yeah, you have so many different layers.
You have a different type of realities which are not connected. They are maybe connected, but on certain points. They are not connected in the every point. So today's technologies are developing in the way that it could be connected in much more points than this certain point. So this overlapping of realities, I think it's very important for this new type of sustainability, because it's not the issue of tourism, people coming to see, you know, having these ridiculous rings on I have one on the hotel, and going around and see beautiful old walls and things. But the thing is how to bring people to really live here. It's a matter of a new migration of people, you know, and the possibilities that people could do, let's say, business from here to another part of the world. So I think we can. You in a way started that discussion about.
It's about reinventing.
Reinventing the life, and what kind of population do we expect in the near future in such spaces like this our coast of ours.
There's one activity was on Schiphol which was one example, and I think what Francesca is doing here is also one model. If you go back to a place very often and regular, people recognize that. They see that you are coming back, and then you should also start to build things what can be a model for them, that they see if you act and you care, they start slowly as well. So on Schiphol 5 years ago, a young guy who is from Schiphol, who grew up in Cologne, came back here as a filmmaker and started a little festival showing films, Croatian films. And then he asked the children in the village, do you want to do a film? So they did a film school for children. And the interesting thing is that the children developed films about future scenarios of the island. What could be the island in the future? And that was very interesting, because then there was a discussion of their parents about that. They run the village, they never discuss about these things. They have a lot of olive trees. They don't produce. When I came there 10 years ago, it was not possible to buy a bottle of olive oil, which was made on the island. Now you can have some. This is a very, very small step, but it is something. And also this, if you come back and you really emphasize these things, that people care for the things that these community structures, these social discussions, it's also about political power, who is making decisions. The water there, for example, in the house which I rent, I asked them if we can maybe do something with the water, because I have nice olive trees around the house, and if I wash dishes, the water is going directly there. So with all the cleaners, no cleaning of the water, nothing. So I said, look, I mean, if you want to keep it, we today use total different stuff than the house was built 100 years ago. so maybe we have to do something. So they said, yeah, okay, we do it. I had to say it 3 years, then they did. But something slowly, that is something what you can do on a small scale. But it is also about tourism, you know. If you say tourism is the big industry what Croatia has, then what kind of tourism do you want? And how can you really line this up? I don't know really. I think sometimes it is an issue which is quite big.
But I think, you know, we
Yeah.
should really put the spot on you. Sorry, you think you got away a little bit too lightly here, you know. UNDP is a title, nice intro,
Sure.
but keep going.
It seems to me,
And there must be a plan here somewhere.
It seems to me that there are two like very important questions. First one is how much is too much. This is about limits to growth and carrying capacity and all these things. And the second one is who gets what. And I think that this second one is even more critical than the first one. Because
I got somebody.
This distribution this distribution of benefits from development, and this is transitional period in every sense, because old way of living is dying. At Vis that used to have something like, I don't know, 8,000-9,000 people living there. Now you have 3. You have like 6 kids in a first grade elementary school. So this old way of living is dying out, and something should be reinvented. In this transition, which is dramatic, people don't want to lose. If I have piece of land somewhere and I can sell it as a property, that buildable property, then I want to use that opportunity, and this creates a lot of development pressure and social capital. It destroys social capital, because I hate my neighbor if he will get buildable area and I will not get one. So, and I'm loser. I don't want to go to dig into around olives if I can get a lot of money by selling piece of land when it get buildable. So these kind of things are real life situations that block everything, so to say.
Well, I think that what I'm hearing is a lot of observations about the situation now. Sorry, and I myself, I don't want to sort of get into it and how I feel about it, because I'll talk forever. But I think last year, Dinko Peracic, who just showed up, was on our panel, and actually had some really interesting ideas, because he's been working on the project called Intelligent Coast, which has its birthplace in Spain, and I hope and believe that it was actually finally a reaction the Spaniards had of their own catastrophe, their own Costa Blanca, their own mess, by which actually the original Minister of Tourism 5 years ago had invited Spain to become the consultants on the strategy for development in this coastline. And I think there was tremendous pressure suddenly, please let's not follow the Spanish model. And Dinko is part of a team of guys working out of Split, who really have been trying to look at these alternatives, which also include large-scale developments such as harbors and big sports centers, and so some of the projects that he showed us last year seemed extremely ambitious and very large-scale to me. But I think that at the same time he has his own understanding of this whole issue of how to create sustainable and respectful architecture and projects that focus a certain amount of tourism in particular areas, leaving the rest of it kind of open, because there's a very big shortage of mid-size harbors, for instance, for the mid-sized yachts that are coming in, because until now, during that 70s boom you were talking about, it was the little 12-meter swans that there are hundreds of in these islands, and all the harbors sort of catered for those size boats. And then you have another level of boats coming in at the moment which have trouble finding somewhere to even refuel. So Goran, come on, you're on stage. Sit here. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
I just pick people out of the audience who I know.
Okay,
I've
good.
got something to say on this
Sorry, I
topic.
just bumped in. You know, I didn't get whether this is a kind of descriptive or a projective discussion, but I would like to take it in a projective way.
Environment, sustainable
Yeah.
development, the future. Because
Yeah.
I want you to talk
No,
about the
this I got,
future.
yeah.
This is what
Okay,
I said.
good.
We've established what the problems are now. Let's hear some solutions, please.
Okay, first this concept of sustainability is in a big extent very dangerous in a way how we see that because it is a kind of image of an neoliberal system which is actually taking care that each of the guys of each of the actors making a development, they take care that their development is being continued. You know, I think it has to be replaced in some part of its meaning into the word of kind of a responsible development, responsible tourism, responsible environment care, and responsible in any extent, because that implies a certain transversality in between different resources, in between population, between society, economy, and so on. So that's, I think, the key concept, and that's something that we are actually working on, that you have this transversability of flows, actually, that you don't, if you are, I don't know, making some tourism development, that you don't just take care that this development will be sustainable in 20 years on, but it will be responsible towards its environment in a way that it introduces the natural forces, the energy forces, the social forces, the economical forces, local ones, and somehow boost them up. You know, somehow you build those things that you find in your own context, and then you boost them up and create some additional value. That's the only way that somehow you can make things live together, and that is very much coming to this idea of tourist visitors, who is who in this game, and so on. Most of the things that we've been working on are based on the concept of the frequent leisure inhabitant. So someone who is not just a visitor. He's totally depersonalized towards the place he's visiting, or he's not a tourist or whatever. But it's someone who is in one extent an inhabitant, who is coming frequently, or who is coming because of some reason, who is somehow attached to the place. And we are always trying to make such systems, I mean, conceptual or physical ones, that can bring people somehow to create our own new citizens, somehow permanent temporary, or I don't know, citizens which are here on some other basis. You know, that because the identity in general is created out of all those mixed flows. You know, and our aim is somehow to present tourists or visitors as someone who is a part of our society. You know, and that somehow together with these external flows, we create our own society, our own economy, and so on. Yeah. So basically, these are the things that we've been working on, and that's our interest. Yeah.
In a way, you are trying to blur this dichotomy between local population and the tourists. You know, not to make it such a.
They're not equal, you know.
Precise.
We have the very different characters, of course, in space. Very different agents, very different individuals. No, but then they all create one very mixed and heterogeneous identity of the local population in general. Yeah.
But also in built environments
as well.
Mm.
But I'd like to ask the question: Is there a difference in strategy, which is what is going on the mainland? Don't get up so suddenly, Philip. You're right. But what's the difference between, is there a strategy planning difference between mainland and islands? I mean, and should there be? Should the development that you're discussing be there? Because it's the population on the islands which is falling drastically. I know on Lopud there used to be 1,500 people just, you know, during and shortly after the war, which has dwindled down to like 200 people during the off-season. And then the tourists arrive, and there's something like 5,000 people a day on the island, you know, so there's this incredible shift. But on the islands, I think you have a really different problem as on the mainland. And for me, what I see going on the mainland is a very big tourism development, whereas I heard through the grapevine that there's a real desire to keep the islands pure and natural and have a completely different development strategy for them. Is this true?
No, yeah.
I think in general it is. I mean, based to the county physical plans, you have more intensive development along the coast on the mainland, and less intensive, should be less intensive on the coastal part. I think I read physical plan of Dubrovnik County, and that's the case for Elafit. So I wouldn't expect. It seems to me that situation here at it seems to me that situation at Lopud is pretty much defined in a way. You have already developed this ugly thing on the other side of the bay, which attracts, I don't know, a significant portion of these 5,000 people that you mentioned. But I don't expect that somebody will build something of that size, at least according to the current physical plan, which define development for the next 10 to 15 or something like that years period. They mention only another tourist zone around the Grand Hotel, which is mixed zone with perspective of development of some villas, which is kind of again more luxury kind of tourism than mass tourism that you were mentioning before. So basically that's it. I don't expect like urban sprawl happening on
But sorry, I'll just
on
come
Lopud.
over and ask the question. But also, from the mic's point of view, but we're talking about sustainable and environmental. So eco-tourism is, you know, I know that there's a lot of that going on around here with the kayakers and, you know, the certain trying to show the beauty of this rather than it just being a clubbing, beachy sort of Ibiza type holiday destination. But how, if you have these remote places, are there any incentives by the government, or are there any technologies that are being, you know, tested to create that kind of self-sufficiency that we actually need, rather than this consumption that you were talking about, and then the subsequent pollution and abuse of resources?
Well, the project that I worked on is supporting this kind of tourism exactly on islands. The problem is that there are very few people that are willing to develop this kind of tourism, to operate this kind of tourism.
Where
Because
are the incentives? There are no incentives. Why should they be willing to do something
because
there's
it is
no
business.
incentive to do?
Because it is business. I mean, it should be business. It should be, if it is not economically sustainable, then it is not sustainable again.
But maybe it is.
And problem is
economical
that
in the long run. Sorry, I hate
Sure,
to disagree
sure.
with you. In the long run, it's highly economical.
I agree.
Nobody ever presents that as an option.
I agree. No. It's presented as option, but it's much easier to earn money by selling property. So, you know, you want to get your land yellow, buildable, and then you can sell it and you earn.
We're talking about technologies on how you run a property that already exists, or you want to build one. I'll give you an example. The
Technology.
All right. The power company that is bringing to Lopud the power. There are two substations. This is boring and technical. I'll be quick. One went into the Grand Hotel because the government used to own all the hotels on the island. So the ugly one, La Fodi at the end, the Grand, and a couple of other small ones. They had their own substation that powered all of their entities, and the village had another substation which it sort of used for its own capacity. Then come the project here at the monastery. We needed power just to actually conduct the work, and then we made a plan of how much power we felt we would need with the water systems and the cooling systems, which we've reduced, you know, already done all the things you've suggested. And then you come to a point where the guys say, well, you know, the actual capacity of those substations is totally overproduced. And you look at these substations, they're like 50 years old, and they should have been repaired or replaced by the company a good 10 years ago, but they haven't. And then everybody's coming with their new little villa and their new little apartment and plugging on and finding a way of, you know, dragging out a little bit more power from the machine, to the point where it's extremely dangerous, I have to say, the now existent substation. And they turned around to me and said, you know what, if you want power, build another substation. The island needs another substation, you go ahead, it costs 100,000 euros. You want power? That's what it's going to cost. And I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to tell everybody I'm being blackmailed by the one and only state-run electrical company, but it's really actually tantamount to this amount. So I felt my reaction is, I want to have no power from these guys. Why should I log on to their power? I want to create my own power. So, you know, there is absolutely nobody who comes along and says there's a government incentive to create some solar, you know, this and that. Of course, the windmills, totally forbidden, not allowed to have them on the coastline. So, you know, you sort of run through a roster of your own research on the internet looking for alternative energy solutions. I have here a lot of roofs and land and water collection systems that come from the medieval times, which were really actually, I can store an enormous amount of water here. And I also started to feel the same thing. They brought the water pipes just 20 meters to the monastery and said, you want water? Guess what? You got to put your own pipe. You know, it's the same story. And then you get water in, you don't get water out. What do you do with your black or your gray or your brown water? The story, there is, not only does the local government here not make anything easy, yeah, they actually, and when you talk about alternatives, and you say, I said, I don't want to just have an alternative because I'm mad with the local companies. I want to do it because it's the right thing to do. And it would be the perfect model project to have a monastery here, which, like many other monasteries up and down the coast, that are all being restored, redeveloped for hotel or not, guest house. And why shouldn't there be a number of available technology that is given to and made, you know, available to people? To me, it's not available. There's no informatics about it. There's no incentive. There's no tax, like maybe a little bit of a tax break so that you can maybe afford it over a 5-year period and, you know, amortize the investment of, yes, buying solar panels is expensive. Nothing, you know, and then all you're up against is everybody I know here who's bought a house or who's thinking of buying a house after 1 year is going, do you know, I still am not connected to the grid. Do you know, I'm still, and I even bribed the guys, and I'm still not connected to the grid. And it's just this, so to me, there's no view of the future of looking ahead. And all these discussions about sustainable just remain discussions. And I'd really wish that we had something more concrete to say about it, because, you know, there has to be a plan and there has to be incentives. And you were talking about the fact that so many of the people who own property here are foreigners. Well, guess what? They can afford this technology. They can. But to bring anything into this country, have a 30% tax. So if I'm buying anything from Norway, Sweden, Germany, you know, new technology, environmentally sound, recyclable, whatever, you know, I'm paying through the nose to bring it in.
But there is a law for this electricity which is produced out of renewable resources like a solar energy. When you sell it, you can produce your energy by solar cells, and this energy which you sell to the electrical company, you sell it per 4 kunas per kilowatt hour. And then when you take the same energy out, you pay 0.4 kunas. So actually this electrical company is obliged to buy the energy that you produce, you know. It's only about administration that they are really making troubles, and it's kind of really on a very local level, and it's on the practical level it's like that. But on the level of the law, it functions. At least this part should function. Yeah. But it's only the question how to get your way to that agreement. Yeah.
And all that you said is true, but simply it took some time. It takes time to develop all these things. And at the moment nobody is working on it because everybody are too busy translating EU legislation on Croatian. You know, so. Yeah, because this is like strategic goal number 1, and everybody in the ministries are working on that. And what you are saying, it takes someone with a vision someone capable of informed about these things and sufficiently supported from the top to push it forward. And it will not happen in next, I don't know, couple of years. But eventually it will, I mean, when it comes at the top of the priorities, when bigger priorities are solved, then it will happen, I guess.
I think
So
what
patience, only patience.
Patience, yeah.
This is what it takes
Patient
here.
for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what you should have here is a little bit the same model what is done now in the moment in Abu Dhabi. You know, you heard about this master project. Not Zaha did. No. There's a master project, which is a new town in Abu Dhabi, which is designed. It's urban planning. It's designed by Norman Foster, and they now are looking for different investors, which will invest, especially in this town, in buildings, but also especially in the producing of energy only by natural resources. So I think you are in a very good position here, and I think maybe some investors should come together, or will be pressed by the government to come together to say, okay, we start with our own production on the different islands. You know, so we don't have grids between island and island. So you product your energy which you need. For example, it could be also tide energy, wind energy. I'm not sure if it's enough wind. Yeah, it's the wind.
A lot of
Yeah, sometimes.
depends what time of year.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe that the frame, what to do, is not very clear in the moment. So I think what you have to study first, or in the first step, is what you want maybe in 20 years or in 30 years. What will Croatia be? Is it more a tourism country, or is it more a country with own energy, with own industry, or whatever? I don't know exactly. And then you can calculate the consumption which you need in the future. And I think you have to do it, and you are in a very good position here with solar energy, with maybe solar energy, with wind energy, with tide energy. Maybe that around the islands you have a good chance to get energy by the tide, but I'm not sure in the moment. It's not strong enough? Mm-hmm. Okay. So all these things has to be studied. And then I think you get a clear view of what you should do in the future. But on the other hand, that's what I said in the beginning, you also have to study how we can reduce the consumption. Yeah? So you need less, maybe tide energy or solar energy or whatever.
Well, thank you. You've been presenting two models of kind of going about kind of planning for the future, and I forget your name, sorry. No, not Dinko. Olaf? Olaf was really talking about a bottom-up model of thinking about how you kind of envision the future, bringing children in, having art participate in the kind of visioning process. And there's this kind of top-down model of bureaucracies and so on, trying to think about the future and so on. And maybe one of the ways that one of the things to talk about is how those two things can come together. What are the kinds of ways that one can bring bottom up and top down to kind of talk to one another, because there seems to be a huge disconnect between the two.
It's about the framework, what Francesca was describing is that the framework for activities is very, by my experience, very strange here. And it has to do with the position of Croatia and with asynchronity. On the one side they want to head up to be part of the European community. On the other side they share already the problems what the European community have without having them yet. So that is asynchronity. And these islands are interesting not because they are so beautiful only, they could be also role models for problems which are already existing in Europe, like Spain. So, and if you emphasize that, if you make clear that this is not something what you only do because you have a nice spot here and keep it, it's more that you can also deal with problems which are already existing if you develop different models. Then it maybe could be also something what could be developed. And I think it is not something what you can do just as a national state. Also the European community is in this thing a chance. But then it means that you have a different framework of a legal framework. You have a zone which has a different status, for example. A totally different status for investment, for development, and then you can bring in people with totally different new ideas and to try to develop like a special zone. This could be something, you know, but then you need a political will on the one side and a vision, and you need people who fill this framework with activities, who are able to feed that with visions which are not just returning that what is existing, the preservation stuff, or just old models recycled from the 60s. You know, because most of the utopian models we deal today are recycled 60s stuff. So, and that is something what is very...
It's very symptomatic that alternative resource now is not linked to alternative social protocol. It's totally disconnect now. And it's very interesting, for example, how now is a bit suspicious. Capitalism reintroduce sustainable as a product. And the intelligence of the post-capitalism is to understanding very clearly how now how to sell right consciousness to the population, to make a new slave attitude, a new perfect, correct, moral attitude to sell product. For example, we were also invited to the Biennale of Venice in the Arsenal 3 months ago, officially. It was impossible to invite Tony Negri to re-ask the question about the multitude, to ask the question about the social organization. They just want a sustainable installation, arty installation, very quiet, very sympathetic, never re-questioning the living together, never re-questioning the social organization or why the capitalism is reconstructing itself on the sustainable producing involvement, etc. And really we split last month with Aaron Besky because it was impossible to put the finger, like you said yesterday, to put the finger on a kind of utopian organization, a kind of living together like there's many cities like Mexico now where people are, like you said, organizing themselves. And without delegation of power, when they reintroduce a kind of local democracy as a neighborhood protocol. Right. And in this case, yes, it's interesting to integrate sustainable, but not only about the energy, about also the negotiation, the kind of politics sustainable. Yeah. And it's very symptomatic that in the Biennale it has been rejected. Of course, of course. We are just doing art, architects are just called to make sympathetic installation about artistic value.
I really agree with that. I mean, it seems to me that part of what I meant by this bottom-up situation is that this might, you know, if you really do take that seriously, there might be alternative modes of kind of political organization that are put forth. The top-down version is we're going to create micro-businesses. You know, that's the model of sustainable tourism. We're going to have businesses for the big and businesses for the small. But if you really take it seriously, there might be really a radical, you were talking about contradictions, there might be alternative modes of political organization that would also lay claim to the question of sustainability in a radically different way, except that those voices don't seem to be coming through. And I think that's really a role for art. I mean, that there is a kind of dimension. I was really interested in the film project that you were talking about, and it's a shame when the spaces for experimentation, like the Biennale, foreclose on the possibility of the very thing that they stand for. So we live in a very strange kind of. I mean, it's not really Croatia that is. You know, this is the Venice Biennale. I mean, that's like. Wow, I was shocked to hear that.
We have such as bottom-up systems that are existing, but the only thing that the country has to make them legal, and just to solve a couple of smaller problems. You have regularly around the urban centers around the coast. You have those, let's say, semi-urban tourist destinations where the people are having their own homes, and they built on the top illegally. They built apartments and bathrooms and whatever they need to receive tourists. You know, and during the summer times and during the tourist season, they live together, tourists and the locals, and they very clearly can define this carrying capacity of their own environment, because that's how much tourists they can take in their plot. You know, I mean, I would just say that such a thing is just existing, but you have to recognize it and make it legal.
I'd like to ask you, because you having been, we slammed the Venice Biennial, would you like to tell us about what your project at the Venice Biennial and how this fits into this discussion here?
Okay, this is very good question that colleague
2 seconds. We can't hear you.
Hemingway.
Well, okay, the bells are silent.
It was a good question in general by colleague Roche, because the question is about the role of architect in the modern world. What is the role of an architect in the modern world? Is it just an artist? Is it just a lot of people like to make some comparisons to movie direction today, which is very popular, and social themes came back from the 60s. We didn't have that in 80s, let's say. And is it some kind of new Leonardo for digital age, you know, or is it a social worker? So it's very hard to tell that architect could be the same, the all-in-one, you know, the all-in-one. So colleagues are obviously dealing with one part of the let's say situation, which is or field which is called architecture. We particularly are dealing with that was your question. We are dealing with the transformation of mechanical society to digital society, from mechanical age to digital age. We are in a way comparing that to the beginning of 20th century, when modernists asked themselves about how architecture should be for the mechanical age, and they developed some prototypes, some ideas, which usually were old things done in a new way. So we are dealing with some totally different thing than not totally, but let's say this transformation here.
I think one of the reasons why everybody seems to always have a problem in answering the question, what does sustainability really mean? And that is because we don't really find it very easy to see it in practice. We all know in theory what it should be, but I think most of the big world, sustainable projects, which I got into this last year with a Brazilian foundation, and I discovered that basically it was only talk. It was such a blah blah, and it became really, it also started becoming, and as I realized, a fundraising tool, because as long as you can say you're in a sustainable environment, you're doing a sustainable project, maybe you get some UNDP money or the World Bank money, and there are all these foundations giving money for and so it becomes, people start using these words just as a means to raise money for this or that project. And what I realized, what I felt was really going wrong was that for sustainability to work, it means people from different disciplines really have to function together, not just talk about how they could collaborate. but really start to integrate their respective disciplines. And one of the aspects of what TBA is doing, I think, is really putting those disciplines back together. Aaron Betsky came to Vienna and talked about his biannual project just 2 nights ago. And he was really describing art to everybody concerned, to an architect's audience, which was pretty scary. And there was a very strong reaction against him. And they were really kind of beating him up. I kind of felt sorry for him, because in Vienna people are very outspoken, and this is in the Mack Museum, and there were all the architectural students there. And I felt that it was slightly overdone, but I understand the fact that people get really angry when you just mush disciplines together, when they just sort of overlap because it's in a way convenient. I think what Francois was describing is very true, and that's what a lot of people are complaining about. But at the same time, why nobody ever discussed the interdisciplinary? If an artist and an architect can work together with a scientist, or in this case with Francois' project, introducing botany, gardens, plants, biospheres, greenhouses, you know, how does that all work? Then you have the water collection, the whole sustainability of the pavilion that he's describing. You know, we're bringing together a number, which is why there are lots of people here at this meeting that are actually part of Francois' project, because he's introduced those collaborators. With Matthew Ritchie, we have reached a point where I think we're close to 20 collaborators on the Morning Line project. And this is difficult for us to manage, and I know from Danielle and my point of view how difficult it's become to create what is really a production team to make these projects realizable. But even though they're small in comparison to a lot of the big sustainable projects that people talk about, which are enormous and huge and ambitious, these are actually being materialized. They're actually going to happen, and I think that's really one of the strengths of this, is that because they're modest in scale, they can actually be done. And Francois' project, and we have to always use temporality as our key issue, because if you say something like his project is permanent, of course you have the preservation issues of the gardens that come up as the main banner of, oh no, this can't happen. But if truth be told, it's more scary if you tell people this is for real. This is really the way if you announce something as permanent, it means you're really standing behind it, and you really think that that's really the future. And I think there's a lot of, there's a lack of people's ability to work together. I see a lot of, these initiatives in Croatia also, but very standalone. I look at the mentality on the island. Everybody has their own little apartment, their own little zobe, their little project here to do their, but nobody's thinking in a collective way. And I find that that's the fault of why sustainability often doesn't succeed, is because the interdisciplinary working relationship just simply, everybody has their own agenda somehow, and it doesn't really work together. I don't know if that's... Sorry, yes. Sorry,
yes.
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Goran, and I'm working in Dolphin Dream Society. So I'm
Dolphin Society?
Dolphin Dream Society.
Okay.
So I'm really, first of all...
He's looking beyond dolphins.
Beyond dolphins.
The Blue World is an NGO who works in Mali Lošinj, and they care about the dolphins in the Adriatic Sea, so they often change our name and their actions. So, first of all, I would like to say and emphasize that I'm very happy I'm here. And also about the whole discussion that the revolution, it's a quick process, evolution, it's a slow. And we saw through our experiences, and we work on the Adriatic region directly on, in a way, to sustainable development and environmental protection. And we start with one program, Support the Adriatic Colors, with 3 colors, the blue, green and white. And through the blue project, we collect 1,600 scuba divers, and in 15 locations on the Adriatic Sea, we took out about 30 tons of rubbish. So this is the direct action. And also we have a campaign, the Save the Blue. Campaign, it's quick, they lost, but we always try to give the result after the project. The green project, we had excellent communication and strategy with the commercial sector in the first year and the EU Commission in the second. And we collect the monies and plant 13,000 trees along the Adriatic coast from Istria to Dubrovnik. And this is a really great experience because we met local communities, the people who live in the local communities. And you asked before what is the difference between land and island mentality. It's really huge because, and it is in some way normal. In island of Hvar there is 4 local communities. Hvar, Jelsa, Sučuraj and Starigan. It is 4 mentalities, like 4 planets on the same land. So yes. And but it's important to know that a lot of civilizations, a lot of armies went through this area, and this belief it's the main root of the people who live there, because they heard a lot of promises, but security and to have money to survive, it's the first step to understand the people who live here. They live in another way then. So my opinion, it's that the sociologists, it's need to, when we build some project, the sociologists really need to give their opinion. And approach with the local communities, it's also special. In this project, it's really excellent, and it's really nice, and also it's really rare, because in Croatia we have a drama in 3 pictures. The first picture, we support the biodiversity and planning diversity, you know. The second picture, so we support the environmental protection, we support the rural development, etc., etc. The second picture, we have master plans with huge hotels. So the second picture, its conclusion that the citizens who live here, it's easier to be the waiter in some French or Russian hotel. And the third picture is that the father from this area tell to his son, I will sell, I don't know, the olives and some lands, and I will buy you apartment on the land. Mm-hmm. So we have to to first picture put in the benefit on the third, to find the really way how to do it. So we are really happy, because now we start to work on one project, and the Dolphin Dream is a leader of this project. It's the name of Island, and we work with 3 regional development agencies and 2 ministries. And I will also tell you that it was really hard to negotiate with the ministries, because you have to find a person who...
Which ministries?
The ministries of the agriculture and the rural development and the regional development. Also, we try to find the person in the ministry of the sea and the islands, you know. We are opening.
Did you find the person? Did you actually find him?
Yes.
Oh, that's already something.
But she's not on the top, so we have to wait now.
Okay.
And we will work on the leader project, so the bottom up. And we are going to collect on 17 islands and 1 peninsula. It's the examples of good practices for the rural development in old crafts, agro and eco-family tourism, and agriculture. And we will try to find also the organic. So in that way we will try to collect the database of the people who succeed without support of the local or governmental support.
Subsidies.
Yes. So and after that we registrate the portal, the Islands Info, and we are going to build the info center for islands for the rural and environmental protection. So the bottom up is the only way. It is the best way, and also we have to support of the ministries, but the ministries all mostly said excellent project, but please don't ask the money. So foreigners mostly understand much more the problem that we who live here. So EU Commission, Norway Embassy, etc., support these processes, and we are happy for that. That's it.
Great. Well done.
Maybe
Yeah, please.
a comment on what you said about sustainable development and how overused this and then overexploited this word is. It seems to me that it can be. First of all, it's obvious that we can't specify it. I don't see the big difference if we talk about responsible development, because you can't measure each of these two. This definition about need of future generation, I don't know what are the needs of, what will be the needs of future generation. I don't know what technology will be there in 100 years. But so, in order to make it more workable, more operational, I think we are on the safe side if we say that well, if we use natural resources in more rational manner, then it's something. We are making a step in the right direction. What you said about big money being sold for big sustainable development projects, just to put things into perspective, Global Environmental Fund, which was founded in '92 in Rio, spent, I think, in this period, from 15 years period, something like $10 billion, and US, for example, military expenditures are a couple of hundreds of billion per year. So we are saving world with 1% in 15 years of what we spend for our army. So, it seems to me that we speak a lot about sustainability because probably a lot of us have bad conscience and we want to feel good. And now we have to invent something else, because this is
Topic of the day.
Yeah, it's not fashion anymore. Now we will talk about some new concept, because we overuse this one. But basically, Mahatma Gandhi said one very, this is critical, I would say. The planet, and probably all of you read it somewhere, the planet is big enough and wealthy enough to feed us all, for needs of all. No, for needs of all people. But it's not enough for greed of one man. So at the moment, if there is no space on the planet for 5, 6, I don't know how many, I stopped counting.
6.5 billion at the moment.
To live at a standard of, and that's it. I mean, we don't have space, we don't have natural resources, we don't have energy. So it's about redistribution, and it's the same thing is here. I mean, somebody mentioned patience. Your friends are impatient about getting connected to grid. People here were impatient for 20 years. I mean, 20 years ago there were military boats going around, and it was not very attractive place to live, and you could buy property for relatively small money. And now people who were there just because they were here see that there are people are coming willing to pay a lot of money for what they have. And of course that creates, kind of tension, kind of desire, kind of, well,
greed.
I mean,
also.
kind of greed, yeah, but why not? I mean, everybody. Ecotourism, ecotourism is the same.
Give another perspective when you mentioned about how much the armed forces are using and how much has been spent. 1% of that is spent proportionally on development.
Much less.
Less than 1% of that amount of money is spent on refugees. you know, that are caused by the conflicts. I mean, the amount of money spent on the refugees of Afghanistan and Sudan and so on is just deplorable. And the World Food Aid Program, so we can get into those kind of social issues too, but it's just the amount of money spent on human beings, you know, that have lost everything in their land and their homes is just the most microscopic of these sort of United Nations funds in a way, which I find is really the most difficult.
But these social issues are critical here. I mean, you can't tell that this is, you know, overly urbanized island or this one. But the problem is this, you know, this tension of development pressure.
I have one remark on the gentleman speak, which is very good. It's about revolution and evolution. Modern architecture was revolutionary because it was coming from mechanical age, which is boom, bang, truss. But digital age should be evolutionary. So that's the issue that it's interesting me very much. So the society is very pluralistic today. So there is no need no occasion for a special new revolution now. It's a more evolutionary type, you know, because we are on the threshold of the new age, which is a digital age, which we are not mainly aware of what's really happening. Like Corbusier said also in the beginning of the 20th century, eyes that don't see the mechanical age. That's what we are dealing today.
Some example in I think Ovarup. Ovarup is working now of a huge master planning of the south on the Wenzhou, I think, a region in China. And they are justifying, they are doing a footprint, a perfect calculation of the footprint of the master planning, justifying the zero emission of carbonic gas, of monoxide of carbon, etc. And because of that, they are doing this master planning exactly on the site of protecting zone, of a protected wild zone, justifying they are never destroying the preliminary protecting zone, animal protecting zone. It's very interesting how the strategy, how the sustainability is became a strategy of development, a strategy of mainstream, of lying, justifying we could occupy something which has been protected before. So it's about the man, it's a bit vulgar, usefulness of sustainability. So that's why I think this kind of mainstream, we have to develop as an architect a kind of resistance. Each mainstream is trying to hide the reality. We know specifically politically and now ecologically. So I think as an architect we have also to reopen the natures as a degree of risk. Of course, not only because of the garden here, but as a degree of negotiation of the risk. And not only as a perfect domesticated vision where we could apply our spreading of good consciousness everywhere. And another thing, it's when you talk about digital age, or parametric age, or computational age, I think the chance of this digital age is to share data. Is a sharing period. So relying or sharing by internet is a sharing period. So it became like a swarm intelligences organization. So our human being has to negotiate with the swarm intelligences as bird, as a flying bird, moving together and avoiding an obstacle. You know that perfectly, of course. But you're a specialist. But honestly, of birds. But honestly, it's this kind of. It's not a revival of a kind of romanticism of a post-New Age attitude where we could come back to a community of sexy, community of sharing our own flagrants like before. But it's very interesting how the tooling now, the digital, computational sharing data. Is a protocol of the possibility of swarm intelligences where you could negotiate with the neighborhood, with the intelligence of the global system. So you could be local, lost in a locality, and to have the intelligence of the global system to negotiate globalization and also this kind of proximity. And that's why, in the way you talk about digital age, but in this way, yes, multitude of Tony Negri is important. What he wrote in the prison, when he was in the jail, the wild anomaly with Deleuze is important. Rereading Spinoza, the degree of ethical, what is ethical is important. The degree of free will, how Spinoza was very suspicious about free will, how we are angry slave about free will, how the free will is used by the capitalism to now sell products or to create the desire of the selling of the buying. So to reconsider, as an architect, to reconsider this field, this articulation, you talk about field, architecture is a field where we articulate knowledge. And maybe not only because of parametric, not because of political, not because of sustainable, but we are lost in an intermediary interface where we need to keep this position of losing, of uncertaintiness.
Things are not defined, so you can define it on one way, another. You know, when you're speaking about what is the final aim of this interconnectivity. The final aim is that the knowledge is going not to be issue anymore, because you'll get all the knowledge. You'll be in a way born with all the knowledge that this world have. So what is going to be issue after that, post-knowledge era, you know? But that's very wide. So
is it knowledge or information?
Knowledge. It's a knowledge. Informations that are put together, which is knowledge.
But you're talking about redistribution. François is talking about sharing, but you know it never comes without. It never comes silently.
And if it does, you should be distrustful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's come back to this.
Ben?
Well, I think, I mean, I appreciate how we kind of always seem to bring this this real positive attribute about technologies and how they might help sustainability. But I think sometimes it's difficult to oversimplify the role of just say, like, we're moving into a digital revolution. Like, I'm always super skeptical about the kind of freedoms that any of this stuff seems to offer, because every time, history has proven every time that all of these technologies and all these kind of ways of finding, let's say, artistic, aesthetic, programmatic, even political freedoms always come back and are as a way to kind of locate you in a way, in a way to sort of either are turned into some sort of branding mechanism or are turned into some kind of some way to find you in a way. That's why, like, I even sort of being born with like infinite knowledge to me sounds like a complete like nightmare. I'd almost want to be born with sort of zero knowledge and only the ability to move, you know, left, right, center. I mean, this is what birds know. Birds only know, like, you know, the ability to be intelligent has nothing to do with like the knowledge of the universe. It has something to do with having a very limited sort of construct, you know. So I think I just you know, the same way that sustainability is sometimes dangerously used to excuse development. I think that sort of, you know, digital and technological issues, especially in architecture and how the world is being built, are sometimes used to for the same reasons. For you know, I mean, look at all the high rises in Dubai we see right now going up. I mean, it's an absolute sort of travesty. It's almost an embarrassment to talk about architecture as a kind of style, or digital kind of manipulations of form as a kind of way to grow cities. It's an absolute I think it's an absolute embarrassment sometimes that we position all this kind of newness as a way to find freedom. I think sometimes we need to be skeptical.
It's not a system which is free, you know. I mean,
yeah, there's
Dubai. It is feudal. It is totally feudalist. You know, it's not capitalism. It is less than that. I was in Astana in Kazakhstan, where they also say that they develop a new city after the model of Dubai. It is totally a strange mixture of feudalism, post-socialism, capitalist structures. There is a new capitalism arising, which is not based on freedom anymore. Also not of the illusion of freedom, you know. I mean, also if you talk about ideology of freedom, also for that capitalism, we believed, needs human rights, also as an ideology somehow. Now we can see in Russia, and you see it also in the Emirates, you can have it without that. You can, and that is much more, I think, you know. We collect samples from people who put money in, and how do they make their money? And we don't talk about that. I mean, you know, of course they will have nice places there, but somebody else is paying. Africa, for example. And that is the thing, you know, that you can't, if you dive into it, then you come to the big issues. Then you have to say, okay, wait for the next revolution. But as Walter Benjamin said, the revolution is not speeding up. He had the interpretation of this is the emergency brake. You know?
In Switzerland now about the stadium of Herzog-de-Meuron in China. You heard about that. In Switzerland there is a lot of protests about the fantastic project which has been done in the wrong location. And so it's very difficult for Nigeria. Do you need to abandon the Commission, to say no to the Commission? Do you need to say yes and to be so naive, so to think that you could do the perfect, beautiful project, totally innocent of the situation? Or could we reveal by the aesthetic itself the condition of the Commission, the condition of the situation, of the location? Could we produce a critical vision, a critical position? And we could argue that finally, of course, we cannot say no to this kind of Commission, but we could infiltrate in the aesthetic, in the aesthetic relationship aesthetic, inside the project, some virus, some system of contamination to justify. At the same time, I say yes, a kind of schizophreny. I say yes to the Commission, but I'm not naive, and I produce something which is on the same time critical of the Commission and accept. And this kind of schizophreny is very interesting. Of course, Deleuze talk a lot about schizophreny.
Also good, you know,
as a target, as a weapon.
Yeah, but that shows the powerlessness
that architects when you talk about the virus that you have to put in some project that shows that that makes transparent the role of architecture nowadays, because who is the enemy? You have to make out the enemy, I think, and this is the and this, in my opinion, is the international construction industry that is like a mafia, giving the prices up. I think the prices have been raised by 25%, for example, in Austria during 1 year, which is ridiculous. And it's not only because the prices of steel and everything went up, it's because they are having their... It's like a mafia, yeah?
That's not a mafia. That's not right. I think it's not right. Sorry.
It's a natural process.
The resources, the resources become smaller and smaller. That's a problem.
Yeah, but that's not the only reason for that.
But that's a very important point. You ask for the money, where the money is coming from, maybe in Russia or in Dubai or wherever. This is it.
Yeah, that's good.
They are going up with the price more and more, that's clear. I would do this if I would be Mr. Putin, for example.
I mean, this is a good
but
point.
I hope that he put his money not in Gazprom and whatever kind of projects, so he put it in the land. That means in the better infrastructure and to build up buildings and towns maybe, or in a better way that at the end can save resources and energy. I think that is one of the very important points.
Yeah. One other thing is the big capital that just asked to grow up. You know, I was recently on one big real estate fair in Cannes. There are huge projects, national projects, regional city projects, and so on. And there you see enormous amount of faceless capital just willing to grow more. You know? And in that game, architects are just a kind of fun makers in that whole game. You know, and the sustainability is just a kind of envelope or just one little tool to get the things done faster. You know, that you can just very fastly implement the thing in a place like Norman Foster is implementing this protected area. You know? So, I mean, this huge capital is just faceless. I'm sure. Sorry,
but it could be the same.
Okay.
Here was one very good issue about the subversivity of architecture. or subversivity of a medium. How subversive should medium be? Is it art today? Art in 20th century had that role to be subversive to the society, and the question is architecture today taking that role in a way? You said, and the other point was about this embarrassing to see something as an architect, as an or people with emotions and so on. I'll refer to Peter Cook and Archigram from the 60s when they presented their plug-in city. There was also like a big discussion, and people were saying, "Oh my God, what's that? Are you mean that we are going to live in this thing?" And they said laconically, "No, you don't have to." So you don't have to look at this building. Today, what I want to say, we're living very pluralistic society. We cannot say this is white and this is black. And a lot of these discussions here are tending to say, this is black and this is white. No, that's something which we left behind us in the 20th century. 21st century is more evolutive, more natural-like. There is no black and white in nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's my point.
But I was curious about when Olaf started talking about identity, which I think is important, and also about the sustainability of people living in islands. They are islanders. Maybe most of them actually like that their time frame is that they work 3 months a year, and they are happy for that. They're happy having a life where then the rest of the time they don't have to do anything. They make all their money in 3 months, which for many people is a wonderful situation. You don't need to do anything else. You work 3 months. You have a lot of tourists coming in. You have a lot of focus. You work very hard, and then the rest of the year you can basically do what you want to do. This can also be seen as a value, as something we could focus on, which you could focus on. For example, here on the island, that there's a lot of leisure time, which we then should focus on. Not so much on the invasion of tourists and so on, but more on what to do the rest of the year. Not that they have to do anything. Maybe they are very happy in doing nothing, and maybe that is actually something that most of us who run around the world, do thousands of projects and so on, would actually cherish as something valuable. So maybe this is the capital of people living in the island.
I mean, there's something different problem. You know, I don't think it is to create a different lifestyle. I mean, normally they do business somewhere else, but also if it would work like that, that would be not a problem. It would be fantastic. The problem is that this kind of lifestyle, which is 19th century based, is now confronted with technologies in the lifestyle of 21st century. And if you combine that, then you create totally different problems. The waste problem, for example, you know what? Also in these 3 months, what amount of waste is produced there, and nobody is caring for it. They just throw it away somewhere. And also about chemical things, you know, when you combine these two attitudes, it's just a time framing from 20 years that you have areas where you can't live anymore. I mean, really not. Forget it. And that is the problem, you know, that we have. So we, in our anticipation and our way to invent scenarios, we are limited. And the things what we are doing much bigger than our imagination. We have not enough fantasy for that what we do. The fantasy is in the reality. The reality is much more fantasy than we. That is the point.
But then maybe you could imagine that this 70% of the year, like that, this could be the creative fantasy capital. Like that you look at it as a strong cultural capital. That you actually have time.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah, but like let's say we take it as
more practical in this way. I think if I pay somebody to clean this beach, then he will doing it.
Yeah, that's right.
So that is something, you know, what helps more to make a perspective that they have a business, but the business is based in a kind of infrastructure where it makes sense. It is about to understand why capitalism is so successful. It's not only to blame it. and maybe you can use if you understand how it is working, because it is creating contradictions all the time as a tool. He is not trying to solve contradictions, he's creating contradictions. It's a mass production of contradiction, that's capitalism. And that's why it is developing like hell. It needs contradictions, you know. It is not trying to say, let's make it. And it is, I think you can do something in this and you can create these businesses, but I think like what you say, just we start, we find people, we clean it. I mean, okay, you can say they throw it away again and again, but it's a starting point. And I think this is also what, on these islands, what I see, this mentality, let's see what they bring. They are here, they tell them something, next year they're not again here, I do my business. But if they see you coming back and you can work on that, then it's a different thing.
So that means you all have to come back, you see. You have to keep coming back all the time to Lopud and Xipan and...
Yeah, but what's this wonderful concept of a different status, feeling that you are involved somehow, you know, the frequent visitor as a citizen. You know, that's something what I really like, this concept that you share not only time and space with people, that you share responsibility, but you also try to activate this, what comes out of that. A lot of people are willing to do that and they don't know how to do it. I mean...
Yeah, for this I think you should make a workshop, maybe over 1 week, where we can work together in all disciplines. For example, this is one example which we did at university, but could be also living homes or wherever. So we designed together with architects. Later on you get this brochure, and if you want I can send it completely by email. So you can send it to different. So it is a project which we did in, for example, in Abu Dhabi, a university project which is only run by natural resources. So I think you have to work together with architects, with construction engineers, with all the experts which can help to manage such a project. But I think that would be the first step which you have to do. First of all, you have to say, what does the island or part of the land needs? And then you can go on in reality, in real projects. That means with the different disciplines, because most of the architects are not trained to work together with other experts. Maybe that you also get another kick in the architecture. You know, I've written a book which maybe it's coming out in 3 months. It's called Energy in the Post-Fossil Fuel Era. And in this book I show a lot of very interesting small projects, small but very fine, I call it. And there's another chapter in zero energy high-rise super tall buildings. You know, SOM, for example, is doing a big project in Guangzhou. And they sell this tower, which has, I think, 75 stories, as a zero energy super tall high-rise building. So it's a mare. Yeah, I calculated this project, and I showed another project, a smaller one, which maybe can run with 50% of natural resources, but only 50%, not 100. And it's not possible to run super high-rise buildings which get the energy maybe in the surface or on top by windmills or whatever. So that's what we studied also in Paris.
We are involved now in a project in the inert Mongolia in China, where they ask us sustainable, zero emission, zero perfect, correct project. And it was not enough, because they used the sustainable again to colonize the inert Mongolia, like the Tibetan, and to erase the cultures. So we find an old legend talking about a utopian territory underground, which was only reachable by hole on the ground to go inside a pure egalitarian society before the China arrived on the Mongolia, on the inert Mongolia. So we did a project as a Stargate to go inside this inert Agarthy paradise or utopia, reachable by the project. And the Chinese became very, very angry at that, because of that. Because they said, okay, sustainable is not enough. you make political in your building. It was just a crater. We just do the craters, and to say it's the entrance of the Agarty. We found the entrance. We found the entrance of the egalitarian society where Mongolian people could escape. And so it was so we don't know if we are doing it because the design is a little bit beautiful. That's why they are a little bit in a very strange position where they love the design but they hate the story. But the story finally feeds the design to be a little bit provocative and to be not naive on this kind of commission.
Rewrite the story.
Huh?
It will build it and rewrite the
Oui,
story.
of course.
You're raising
There's a rumor of the entrance of the Agarty.
You're raising an interesting point, and I think that maybe one of the words that we haven't really discussed is globalization. And we're kind of, talking about it in relationship to sustainability, but it seems to me important that to recognize the relationship between these two things in terms of the question of rights and responsibilities that you were talking about. I mean, I was just thinking back of the history of kind of previous ways of thinking at a kind of planetary level. I mean, the first. We like to think of it in economic terms as mercantilism, but in the 16th century when mercantilism, arises, most people are farming. So it's really a kind of idea, right, that people are kind of looking towards, and it requires the state, the nation, to really operate. And the state is really, the colonization is the process of thinking at a planetary scale, but really to feed the formation of a state condition which provides kinds of rights and responsibilities for one population at the expense of others, which is kind of the project in China dealing with that. But now as we're that really we're looking at the globalization as a kind of undermining of the state in some way, and we're talking about sustainability essentially as a kind of as a question of resources, but it's also a question of political formations and what kinds of rights and responsibilities are being spun out of this. They're the kinds of territories that we're talking about. I mean, what I think is very interesting about sustainability is that immediately it calls forth a kind of territory that is different from the national state. So it begins to kind of, you can't really think about sustainability if you draw the same kinds of borders that you have in nations. If you look at the fact that most of the pollution that you breathe in LA comes from China, for instance, you really just can't, the borders are completely different and the kinds of exchanges that happen are completely different. So that, the kinds of scale shifts, when we look at architecture, we're looking at kind of building scales, but I think the kinds of things that we need to be looking at and the kinds of shifts of scales that sustainability implies and the kind of territories that are drawn out are different. If we look at, pollution, if we look at the chemical, they're completely, things get blurred. So I don't know that we're looking at sustainability, but what we're really aiming at is a kind of restructuring of the territory and of rights. I don't know where it will go, but I think that maybe if we can bring in the question of these questions together around the process of globalization, that we shouldn't disassociate sustainability, because if you do, then what happens is the kind of thing that François is talking about, that there's all sorts of violences that get performed in the name of sustainability and abuses, actually. So.
Yeah, and it seems to be always somehow connected to these popular sustainability issues that things get very generalized, especially what we have understanding of sustainability somehow from the 60s. And instead of looking at this kind of deeper ecology, what you are mentioning, to this kind of polyscalar condition or multiple scales being intertwined. And that's why I think framing it somehow within maybe François' style is kind of interesting in that sense, as a kind of particular story or a particular frame within which you can start weaving these different strands. And I think actually garden is, because we talk about gardens during this seminar so much, is a kind of beautiful theme historically as well, because if you look at for instance, how the garden was invented historically, one of the first gardens obviously was a labyrinth, which was in Greece, which was such a kind of hyper-rational construct, and it was kind of a desire to conquer nature or a kind of wild forces of nature by this kind of extreme rationality. So even the myth of a minotaur or a kind of this wild creature being trapped into something that is a human-made attempt to control wild forces of nature was reflected in this myth. And if you go throughout history and look, for instance, at the Renaissance gardens, which we are dealing here as well, in Italy or also in Croatia, we have lots of, especially in this area, the history of arboretums and this idea of constructing the microcosm within this frame of the garden. So historically, in Renaissance, because there was certain larger ecology of global travels, you had this kind of, yesterday we talked about collecting the plants, so collecting this kind of library of species somehow within this kind of construct of a garden. So if we try to fast forward, I will skip a few other gardens. One could talk about French, for instance, garden and the effect that had on urbanism, major kind of urbanistic developments, for instance, many other ones. But if we fast forward to today, because some people were mentioning, for instance, this kind of digital or emergence of digital. If you look, for instance, at Amazon's cloud computing recently, or some of these developments, it seems to be that this garden or this wildness of what we try to conquer somehow into something very confined is coming back through this new garden now, or a cloud that one could say is this dematerialized ghost, but is very much affecting all these processes. And it seems to be the tendency, if one looks at something specific, like for instance computation or what, even the example of something like Amazon that started as online selling of products, but now it's actually trying to tap, similarly like many of us, maybe we started with I don't know, using a software for movie industry and modeling some fantasies, but now tapping into the code, or a kind of much more molecular bottom element. Some people were mentioning this kind of bottom actions, bottom agents in reality, like the Dolphin project. So I think this is a kind of powerful potential entrance where we can start synthesizing this immaterial intelligence somehow with some specific agents, but the trick is to maybe recognize what are these specific host agents that we can extract at this territory. And I think the Dolphin project examples were beautiful, as well as Francois' project of toxicity, which is not necessarily the obvious kind of master plan what we would expect, what seems to be the practice so far in this area, to just impose some sort of global idea, but rather to tap into something extremely specific, but then to work polyscalarly, as you were happy, and somehow try to construct this imagination, but then potentially inspire also change in awareness, and not only a kind of isolated project, but kind of change in culture. Which I think in this area, because I'm someone who is maybe coming from many worlds or realities at the same time, because for instance my parents have a house on the worst island in Croatia, which I'm sure all the Croatians here heard about, Vir, which is such a big deal because it's supposed to be a nuclear plant built on this island. So no one wanted to build there, so there were no regulations, so suddenly it exploded into a complete disaster. So that's a kind of, if you want to talk about urbanistic or ecological, or it's the biggest disaster of the coast. So on the one hand you see these kind of examples, so I'm quite familiar with the kind of culture and tendencies in this area, but also with the qualities, or a kind of unique qualities that this territory offers. So I think the challenge for people working with in this area would be somehow to find these agents that you can actually tap into, and that's why I think this project that you're working with on this toxic garden is actually an interesting example of that actually explicitly manifested.
Could we talk about a kind of productive narrative? Because there's a narration. The dolphin, it's vectorized by a narration, but in a way, it's not a narration as a fiction. It's a productive, effective narration. So it's very interesting how it could be vectorized by the people talking about the project as a rumor, but this rumor is effective in a way. So it's not in this kind of articulation between a scenario, effective scenario, which is producing a transformation, but in the same time, it could be tell as a story.
I would like to tell you there is a many Monty Python situation here, and this because in 1990s the Ministry of the Spain of the Tourism told to our ministry, and then don't argue always about the communism. They save your countryside and your Adriatic region because we in Spain have a lot of hotels every 20 meters, so we devastated our coast. So this is the Monty Python, the communism. It's not good in some way, but they save in some way they save the natural heritage of Croatia.
They always say that poverty is the best agent of preservation, but that still makes poverty a pretty awful thing. I mean.
Yeah, no, it's not only the poverty, it's about the tourism models as well, because the former state was very much pushing for the nautical tourism and camping very much, which is not mass construction on the coast.
Croatia has a lot of so the people who lives here, who was born here, they don't know the values of the natural, of the cultural heritage, because this is normal for us. You have to travel abroad to compare what really we have and what is the examples in the foreign countries. And in present situation, we have a lot of opportunities, and really, I don't know, I speak from the bottom of my heart. I would like to see the businessmen who would like to support the green entrepreneurship. So to find potential in that way, to save and to produce. Also my opinion that the whole globalization go to the profit business, to the social business, because we need to communicate with the citizens, with the environment, if you like to grow up. That's the basic, and it's really hard. We talk a lot about the sustainability. Where is the starting point of sustainability and where is the finish? I think that is the personal or the business interest. You always put the higher level of for that word. So we have to find really where is the point when we have to start. We have to stop with building something. We also have an experience that a lot of people from the Europe, and when they come here, they are really happy. They're really amazing with our monuments, with the natural heritage, and also in nautical tourism. They told us, please don't build the new marines, because we sleeping marines we have in Spain and Italy. You have a beautiful nature and visualize some other way of nautical tourism.
Can I just say, go back to this question of the narrative that François was talking about, because it seems to me that when we're talking about this kind of attempt to shift between scales, and what gives integrity to something that is multi-scalar, something that goes from the chemical to the regional, is not the same as the traditional categories that we have. Like when we talk about the integrity of an architectural project, we usually talk about it in terms of aesthetics, in terms of formal, kind of issues. We had categories coming from art history as style, that gave it integrity. But when you're trying to deal with these multi-scalar realities, there is a need for a new type of argument of integrity. And I think this question of narrative is very interesting, of a way to try to create a connection among scales. And it really requires a total shift in terms of different disciplines. In my own discipline of architectural preservation, you really cannot talk about. Architectural preservation is all about style, original moment, and so on. But you really cannot think about the integrity of a historic resource in terms of in formal terms if you're going to be multi-scalar. So if you go to this question of narrative, right? So for instance, one of the projects I've been working with is this: if we really take seriously the question of pollution, the major agent of destruction, the major agent of the origin of preservation is the origin of the production of pollution. So you begin to think about this narrative, but then that comes with a responsibility to actually trace the history of pollution. But we actually don't have a history of pollution. So narrative is intimately linked to the production of history, and history is a kind of multi-scalar form of integrity. So you can't produce history unless you have documents. So you have to actually begin to document pollution. And how do you begin to document the history of pollution? So, it's very hard, but you have to, that's what I've been working on, is trying to document the history of pollution. So it's layered on buildings like the history of, the rings of trees. So, how do you take that out and how do you begin to analyze it? It's captured, in the modern period, it's captured between layers of paint. Once you have modern paints, you can, instead of cleaning the building, people would just paint over it. So you get pollution trapped inside of it in different points of the earth. But what that means is that your entire discipline and the entire framing of your discipline needs to change. I mean, that if you really begin to take this question of narrative seriously, the kinds of practices that you do, the kinds of projects that you used to, it really
changes you forever.
It changes everything. It changes the goalposts. For preservation, absolutely. So this for me is really interesting to come here and listen to everyone, because it really you can't go back safely anymore. Once you enter somehow, it's done. So this question of narrative for me has become really important.
It's kind of line of subjectivation.
Right.
And post-capitalism produces a lot of subjectivities now. You are buying a four-wheel car as a Hummer to protect your family because the fears of the TV show every day. So finally, the capitalists use this kind of subjectivities to sell and to alienate. So to integrate this kind of narration is also perhaps a way to disalienate from inside the narration, the official narration, about toxicity, about risk, about your relationship to the wild natures, etc., etc. But there is about the development. I remember we failed a project on the north of New York, not so far from Beacon, from the extension of the DIA Foundation, and it was a region where there was the first immigrant coming from Europe as a Fourierism. Trying to deal between social protocol and nature protocol, as a natural and social behavior. And it's very interesting in this part. Everybody has a part of the land, an enormous part of the forest. Nobody can close the forest. Each owner has to create the maintenance himself of the forest, and even to let the trace of the wild animal. So they became the gardener of the wild nature. Of course, the wild nature in the US is a little bit Bambi's and Walt Disney. Huh? It's very sophisticated in a way of fairy tale, also in a fairy tale. But immediately the owner first they can create fence or boundary of the limitation of the property, and they need to not only accept the crossing of the wild natures, but engage the maintenance of this wild natures. And it's very interesting in a way of course it's coming from the 19th century, it's coming from a kind of Fourierism relationship to the social organization, and they are still living in this kind of sympathetic and sometimes horrific utopia so for many other reasons.
What's the name of the town?
It's near Beacon, so I don't remember. There's several towns around the DIA.
Yeah.
And it's like I forget it's not a community, but they are clearly, and Pierre-Hugues did a very interesting work there in this location, and it's no, I don't remember. It's very good send you. Good send you environment. So they need, for example, to create the maintenance of the boar. The animal, the wild animal, is very dangerous in a way. The boar could cross your property, even with your child. So the danger they need, so it's not only Bambi sometimes. So they have to deal with this kind of forest. So you cannot let totally free your daughter playing on the back of the garden without to engage a minimum of risk. That is interesting.
Yeah, just in between here, or is it waves?
So
I thought I saw some dolphins over there.
Yeah, more on the
I often see them going through here.
Yeah, the social experiments in the US.
It's a narration.
Well, I think, thank you so much for what you said, Jorge. And I think this conversation started off in a very pragmatic way and went exactly where it should, into a more philosophical discussion about these values that we need to alter. And actually I had a conversation last night with Vesna, who's, you know, sort of project manager for all our efforts down here, and she looked at me and she says, I know what my next job is going to be. It's like, you're going to come up to me and say, where's the permit to build Francois' building? And now I have to figure out how to get you that permit, you know. And I felt kind of really, first of all, quite sorry for her, that she actually felt that this is something we wanted the next couple of months, because we know how difficult it is to get the permits here. And I said to her, maybe it's not so important to try and draw from Francois' project an essence, or maybe take a few points from it that you think might be the ones that you can sell to some person at the authorities, but to let Francois' project really land and really be discussed and really become part of a utopia for Lopud, and somehow focus everybody's attention on those issues. And the parallel that you drew yesterday for it, about how we are poisoning ourselves constantly with pollution, and how this island is being poisoned by the tourists when they come here, 5,000 a day, you know, sort of eating and pissing and shitting, and, you know, so basically the whole kind of process of mankind. And I think we really can look at some of these topics in quite a hard way. And I think being provocative in this way is really what we need to be doing here. And I think it gives everybody food for thought, you know? Yes? May I and I just, so I'd like to thank everybody who came and sat with us under the trees. It was really nice to move outside into the garden. And thank everybody in the panel, and Dinko and you have both joined the panel like spontaneously. So we had a few extra panelists today, and I'm really grateful for that. That's really what is nice to happen here. And Klaus, thank you for your interventions and your knowledge, and we will definitely be picking your brains further. I'd like to make